Deep within a forgotten archive in Virginia Beach, amongst yellowed papers and faded photographs, an extraordinary discovery came to light in the autumn of 2024. A sealed envelope, marked with precise instructions, not to be opened until 2025 EC. Inside, a wax cylinder recording and handwritten transcriptions that would reveal Edgar Cayce's most intimate thoughts on humanity's greatest mystery. 70 years after his death, the forbidden words of the sleeping prophet could finally be heard. The recording was made in December 1944, a few months before his departure from this earthly dimension. Cayce, then 67 years old, was in a peculiar state of consciousness, neither fully awake nor in his well-known prophetic trance. It was as if he inhabited a threshold between worlds, a sacred space where the soul whispers truths that the waking mind rarely captures. His voice, recorded on those wax cylinders with an ethereal and distant quality, carried the weight of someone who had crossed countless times the curtains of time and death, always returning with fragments of a greater reality. That December afternoon, with snow falling softly on the Virginia fields and a fire crackling in the hearth of his studio, Edgar Cayce decided to break the silence he had maintained for decades about his deepest and most disturbing experiences. The man who had dedicated his life to unraveling the mysteries of healing, past lives, and the Akashic records, had never openly spoken about what truly happened when a soul left the physical body. His psychic readings were full of veiled references, metaphors carefully constructed not to frighten those who sought only practical answers to their earthly afflictions. But that cold December, aware that his days were numbered, he finally allowed himself to reveal what he had witnessed in the dimensions beyond the veil. The recording began with a confession that would shake the foundations of everything thought to be known about death. Cayce admitted that, during his deepest trances, he not only accessed information about the past and the future, but literally walked the corridors of eternity, observing the process by which souls transitioned from one existence to another. He had been, unbeknownst to anyone, a silent traveler in the territories of death and rebirth. In his words, recorded with an almost palpable intensity, Cayce described how, in the final moments of physical life, the soul does not simply depart from the body, but goes through a complex and profoundly significant process. He spoke of a kind of gradual awakening, like someone slowly emerging from a deep dream. But in reverse, earthly life was revealed as the dream, and death as the awakening to true reality. The process, according to his transcendental observations, began days or even weeks before the final moment. The soul, sensing the proximity of the transition, began to subtly detach from the physical body, creating those mysterious moments when the dying seem to converse with invisible people or gaze into dimensions that others could not perceive. Cayce explained that these were not delusions of a declining mind, but rather the first glimpses of the expanded reality that awaited them. He described in visceral detail how, in these moments of transition, deceased loved ones approached the deathbed, not as ghosts or apparitions, but as beings of vibrant light and unconditional love ready to guide the soul on its journey back to the cosmic home. These encounters, according to Cayce, were as real as any physical experience, perhaps even more real as they occurred on a plane where illusion and falsehood simply could not exist. The recording also revealed something Cayce had kept in absolute secrecy. During his trances, he not only observed these transitions, but sometimes was asked to act as a spiritual guide, helping lost or confused souls find their way to the light. He spoke of encounters with beings who had died in traumatic circumstances, still trapped in the dense vibrations of fear and pain, unable to recognize that their earthly journey had ended. In these cosmic interventions, Cayce assumed the role of a shepherd of souls, using his voice and his spiritual presence to reassure the lost, showing them that death was not an end, but a transformation, a release into a wider and more luminous existence. He described how, in many cases, a touch of genuine compassion or a word of encouragement was enough for these souls to free themselves from their self-imposed prisons and move towards the light that had always been there, patiently waiting for them. But perhaps the most impactful revelation of the recording was his description of what he called the soul's tribunal. Not an external judgment imposed by a distant deity, but a process of self-assessment where each soul, in the presence of its purest essence, revisited all the moments of its earthly existence. Cayce spoke of how he had witnessed countless times this moment of absolute truth, where there was no possibility of self-deception or empty justifications. In this intimate tribunal, the soul was not judged for its actions, but confronted with the energetic consequences of every thought, word, and deed. Genuine love radiated golden light, while hatred, envy, and cruelty created dense shadows that the soul itself needed to confront and transform. There was no external punishment, only the inevitable need to balance the energies that had been misaligned during the earthly journey. Cayce revealed that he had witnessed souls who, after this life review, voluntarily chose to return to challenging existences on Earth, not as punishment, but as an opportunity for growth and healing. Suffering, in this cosmic perspective, was not a curse, but a tool of spiritual refinement, a way in which the soul sculpted its own divinity through human experience. The recording continued with descriptions that transcended any adequate earthly language. Cayce attempted to express the inexpressible, the feeling of absolute completeness that souls experienced when they finally remembered their true nature. He spoke of dimensions of existence where time held no meaning, where past, present, and future coexisted in an eternal dance of infinite possibilities. In these higher dimensions, according to his visions, souls didn't lose their individuality, but expanded it unimaginably. Each consciousness simultaneously became a unique drop in the cosmic ocean, and the entire ocean itself. Separation revealed itself as the grand illusion of physical existence, while unity showed itself as the only true reality. He described encounters with what he called cosmic architects, beings of such magnificence and wisdom that their presence was almost unbearable even for his expanded consciousness. These beings, Cayce explained, were responsible for coordinating the life experiences of billions of souls, weaving a cosmic tapestry of learning and evolution that stretched across eras and dimensions. The recording took on an even more intimate tone as Cayce began to speak about his own experiences of temporary death during the deepest trances. He admitted that there were moments when his soul had completely detached from his physical body, traveling to regions so far removed from earthly reality that returning seemed impossible. On these journeys, he had experienced states of consciousness that defied all human understanding. Moments of merging with the Creator Source, where his individuality dissolved into an ecstasy of absolute love and knowledge. These experiences, he confessed, had forever changed his perception of life and death. He no longer feared physical death, for he knew it was merely a change of clothes, a transition from one room to another in the infinite mansion of existence. But there was something more unsettling in his revelations, the awareness that many souls chose to remain trapped in earthly patterns long after their bodies had disintegrated. Cayce described how he had encountered beings who had died decades or even centuries before, but who still clung to the identities, traumas, and obsessions of their last earthly lives. These spirits, he said, created a kind of personal purgatory for themselves, endlessly reliving the same dramas and conflicts, unable to accept that that existence had ended and that a new adventure awaited them. The compassion in his voice was palpable when he spoke of these lost beings. He had dedicated a considerable portion of his spiritual journeys to trying to reach them, using his unique ability to traverse dimensions to offer them broader perspectives. Often, simply showing them a glimpse of the light that awaited them was enough for them to finally free themselves from their self-imposed prisons. But there were also revelations about beings who had made the transition with mastery, souls who had completed their earthly journeys with such grace and wisdom that they became beacons of light for other evolving consciousnesses. Cayce spoke with special reverence about these ascended beings, who chose to remain close to the earthly planes to assist in humanity's evolution. The recording reached its climax when Cayce began to speak about a specific encounter that had forever changed his understanding of death and the purpose of existence. During a particularly deep trance in 1943, His consciousness had been led to a dimension he described as the heart of time, a place where all possibilities existed simultaneously and where humanity's future was constantly being rewritten through the individual choices of each soul. In this sacred place, he had come face to face with a presence of such magnificence that his description became fragmented, almost incoherent. It wasn't a person in the common sense, but a collective consciousness that represented the accumulated wisdom of all souls who had ever completed their journey through matter. This presence had communicated with him not through words, but through direct transmissions of knowledge that had flooded his consciousness with truths he knew he would never be able to fully express. The central message of this cosmic communication was simultaneously simple and profound. Death did not exist. What we call death was simply an illusion created by the limitations of human perception. Consciousness was eternal and indestructible, and every apparent ending was actually a new beginning in disguise. More than that, every soul that went through the experience of physical incarnation was contributing to the evolution of all creation, adding its unique experiences to the cosmic database of universal wisdom. Cayce revealed that he had understood, in that transcendental moment, that his own life dedicated to psychic readings was only a small part of a much larger service he performed on the invisible planes. While his body slept, and he offered guidance to those seeking healing, his soul was simultaneously working in higher dimensions, assisting in the transition process of discarnate souls, and serving as a link between the visible and invisible worlds. This revelation had been so overwhelming that upon returning to his physical body, he had been in a state of shock for several days, unable to function normally as his earthly consciousness adjusted to the cosmic truths he had witnessed. He spoke of how he had struggled with the decision to share this experience, knowing that few would be prepared to accept its implications. The recording continued with Cayce describing specific signs he had observed manifesting when a soul was preparing for the final transition. These were not only the obvious physical signs, but subtle changes in the person's energetic vibration, alterations in the color and intensity of their aura, and a kind of thinning of the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. He spoke of how in the final days or hours before death, the veil between dimensions thins, allowing the dying to often perceive the presence of deceased loved ones, landscapes of unimaginable beauty, and celestial music echoing from higher planes. These experiences, he emphasized, weren't hallucinations or the product of failing minds, but genuine perceptions of realities that have always existed beyond the reach of physical senses. A particularly touching part of the recording was his description of how souls prepare to leave earthly relationships. He revealed witnessing countless farewells on the unseen planes, where departing souls spiritually visited their still incarnate loved ones, whispering words of love and comfort that were rarely consciously perceived, but always reached the recipient's heart. These spiritual visits, he said, explained why people often felt the presence of loved ones near death, even when physically distant. The soul, preparing for its return journey, naturally sought to complete emotional and energetic cycles, offering healing and forgiveness where needed, and solidifying bonds of love that would transcend physical separation. He also described what happens to souls who die suddenly or traumatically. Contrary to popular belief, these souls weren't automatically lost or confused. In most cases, the intensity of the experience catapulted their consciousness directly into higher dimensions, where they were immediately met by guides specializing in assisting with abrupt transitions. The real challenge, he explained, wasn't how one died, but the state of consciousness cultivated during life. Souls who had lived with love, compassion, and service to others transitioned with natural ease, regardless of the circumstances of their departure. Conversely, those deeply identified with ego, materialism, and earthly dramas often faced longer adjustment periods on the unseen planes. The recording took on a prophetic tone as he spoke about humanity's future understanding of death. He foresaw a time not far off when earthly science would develop instruments capable of detecting and measuring consciousness beyond the physical body. This discovery, he prophesied, would revolutionize human understanding of existence and forever remove the fear of death from the human experience. He spoke of technologies that would allow direct communication with discarnate consciousnesses, methods to measure and map the energetic fields of the soul, and discoveries that would scientifically prove the continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. This new era of knowledge, according to his visions, would lead to a fundamental transformation in how humanity lived, died, and related to the mysteries of existence. But before this golden age could manifest, he warned of a period of great confusion and suffering humanity would have to endure. He described visions of wars, natural catastrophes, and societal collapses that would force people to question their most fundamental beliefs about life and death. Ironically, it would be through this crisis that many would finally awaken to the spiritual truths he had spent his life revealing. The most intimate part of the recording came when he spoke of his own impending death. He knew with the certainty only a true seer could possess that his days in the physical body were numbered, but in his voice there was no fear or sadness, only deep gratitude for the opportunity to have served as a bridge between worlds. He revealed he'd begun receiving visits from deceased loved ones, particularly his mother, who was preparing him for the upcoming transition. These weren't visions or dreams, but real encounters in altered states of consciousness, where he received instructions on navigating his own return journey home. His mother, he described with a voice choked with emotion, had become a kind of spiritual guide on the unseen planes, helping other souls transition from physical to spiritual life. She had shown him the work he himself would be called to perform after leaving his body, a service even broader and more significant than what he had rendered during his earthly incarnation. He revealed that he understood, through these preparatory encounters, that his death wouldn't be an end but a graduation to a higher level of cosmic service. He would continue his psychic readings, but from an expanded perspective, free from the limitations and distractions of the physical body. More than that, he would become part of a council of ascended beings dedicated to guiding humanity through the turbulent times ahead. The recording neared its end, with him making a series of specific predictions about signs confirming the truth of his revelations. He spoke of archaeological discoveries, validating his insights into ancient civilizations, medical breakthroughs confirming his understanding of energy healing, and atmospheric phenomena preceding the great planetary shifts he had foreseen. But the most specific and unsettling prediction was about his own death. He revealed he would depart in January of 1945, precisely as a world war was ending. His death, he explained, would be synchronized with planetary energetic shifts that would facilitate his transition to higher dimensions of service. In the recording's final words, he made a poignant plea for his revelations to be preserved for future generations. He knew many of his contemporaries wouldn't be ready to accept these truths, but he trusted that a time would come when humanity would be prepared to understand and apply this sacred knowledge. His voice, already faint and distant, carried a final message of hope and encouragement. He urged all who might eventually hear his words to remember that death was merely an illusion, that love was the only true reality, and that each soul was eternal and indestructible. The journey through matter, however challenging it might seem, was but a brief episode in the infinite adventure of consciousness exploring its own divine nature. The recording ended with the sound of Cayce breathing, deeply, as if absorbing the atmosphere of this physical world one last time. In the accompanying files, a handwritten note confirmed that he had died precisely as he had predicted, in the early hours of January 3rd, 1945, whispering words about a golden light that came to fetch him. 70 years later, when these forbidden revelations finally came to light, they brought with them not only confirmation of many experiences, that countless people had had near-death experiences, but also a completely new perspective on the purpose and meaning of human existence. Edgar Cayce's words, preserved on those time-yellowed wax cylinders, offered humanity a detailed map of the most important journey any soul could make, the journey back to the cosmic home from which all consciousness emerged and to which all inevitably return, transformed and enriched by the sacred adventure of having been temporarily human.